Kelsey Lewin. I'm the co-director of the Video Game History Foundation. And today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about what saving video game history means. Because I think everyone here, sometimes when I give a talk like this, I start off like, well, games are really culturally important and we want to save them, we want to tell their stories. I think all of you guys get that, right? We don't have to do that whole thing? Okay. So our mission at the Video Game History Foundation is to ensure that storytellers, and I mean that very broadly, have the tools they need to tell the story of video games. And I want to start by asking people, what does it mean to preserve games? And I think most of the time when people think of this, it means different things to different stakeholders, but most of the time people think of this, they think of that. Lots of games. Let's oversimplify. Let's pretend that this is every single video game that has a physical release ever made. It's been saved from the garbage. You can pull it off the shelves at a library. Awesome. Okay, they have to be playable too. Let's keep a bunch of hardware, make sure it's all working, and make sure there's a guy on staff who can fix it if it stops working. Don't forget arcade cabinets. You got the storage for all of this. Let's pretend for a moment that we've managed to save every single digital video game ever, and it's all on hard drives. Obviously, all of this is impossible, but let's just pretend. Let's pretend we've done that. All right, cool. We've saved all the video games. Everyone can access it. But now what? What I want to talk about is, at the Video Game History Foundation, we're historians, and so game preservation means something a little bit different to us. What can a historian get from a game? Have any of you guys seen Chris Kohler's thing on Kotaku's Complete in Box? It's a video series he does where he takes the box and the manual of the game and he just tells you everything you can learn about the game from that. You can play the game, you can learn, how it played, what it looked like. If you're good at it, maybe you can get to the end of it. If you have the box and manual, you get some more, you get some of the information, some of the stuff they wanted you to know, maybe some lore. Is that enough? To us, it's not. So we don't collect video games at all. Our foundation, we think that other people are doing it already. Video game historians know how to use emulators, first of all. You don't need to necessarily have the original game. Video game collecting is a very popular hobby. Those walls of games that I showed before, those are not libraries, those are people's collections. And other libraries, like the Strong Museum of Play, as seen here, are really doing an excellent job of keeping the actual games themselves already. So to us, what does it mean to preserve a game? I have divided it into two categories, and how the games were made and how the games were played. So how the games were made, this goes over a lot of different stuff. I mean, you guys, this is a game development school, so you guys are already doing all of this. You've got the source code, you've got original art and documentation, assets. You may even have some prototypes and betas and all that stuff. We have a bunch of librarians and archivists here. You guys probably already know what the problem is with all of this. Many. But the first of which is it's all a trade secret. They don't want you to know any of this stuff. The game companies don't want you to peek behind the curtain. The video game industry is very, very secretive. So even if you were to have your hands on something like this, they don't want you to have your hands on it. They're probably going to ask for it back. Source code and all of this stuff was probably trashed years ago. If you're talking about older games, it's a very recent thing that games had a kind of secondary market and that we were re-releasing games and taking what was old and just repackaging it and selling it again to people. And even modern developers lose their source code all the time, whether an office moves or storage gets overwritten. This happens really frequently, and in fact, it even happened to the studio that our co-director works for, and he's lost his own games, so awesome. But the best way to access how a game was made and to be able to really tell the story is by knowing all of this stuff. So here's our approach. Stop the bleeding, fix the future. Very intense. Whatever still exists, whatever's still out there, we're going to go find and we're going to get. Sometimes developers took home stuff that maybe they shouldn't have took home. I encourage you all to keep that stuff. I'm not going to say the word steal, but you know, you drew the art, you did the code, like you should have a copy of that somewhere, right? So we're accepting donations, both through very legitimate sources. Sometimes the companies come straight to us, that's wonderful. Sometimes offices shut down, companies shut down, we're there with a truck, we'll take it all. And also, you know, if you happen to have something that you shouldn't have, we have a very discreet upload path that we don't look at. It goes to a place that's for a future historian once we've figured out how we can make that stop being illegal. And we're also advocating for a better future. So we're equipping libraries, first of all, with the tools to handle video game development material. We are in year 2 of a joint grant with the University of Washington, and what we're doing is building a controlled vocabulary to handle this material so that it can be properly cataloged and accessed if it does go to a library. We're also publishing the results of video game source research, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a second. And we're advocating for the commercial industry to join in on the discussion and start getting okay with the idea that it's okay to study video game source code. We can tell a lot of really interesting stories this way. We can do really cool stuff with source code, such as, you guys seen this? The Aladdin and Lion King collection that just came out. So this happened because of some source code we weren't supposed to have. An anonymous source donated the source code for Aladdin on the Genesis to us, and Rich Whitehouse, who's a really talented engineer, went through, wrote an article for us, digging through this source code and finding all of the things that were commented out, enemies that were maybe supposed to be in the game, things that were supposed to be in the game, and was able to even fix some bugs that were in the original game. And this article got really popular, and Disney caught wind of it, and they were like, hey, do you have that source code? We have that? And so for the commercial industry even, it's a good idea to back up your source code, to have it accessible somewhere. It doesn't have to be with us. Could be at the Library of Congress. It could be anywhere, but you want to have this not just for historians to look at, but also because it's now a commercially viable thing to have all of this. The second part is how games were played. And I think if you were a historian talking about any of these games right here, there's no way you could tell the full story without showing these photos right here. Pokemon made the cover of Time magazine. That's a photo from Minecon. There's Pac-Man Fever. Just knowing how the games were developed, it's not the whole story. It's it's part of the greater story, and it's probably the lesser of the important stories, at least in the case of these games right here. These are extreme examples, but they're the importance of how a game was played and talked about is always going to be relevant for telling its story. How does the world interact with the game? When we talk about games, we discuss them. There's criticism online, everywhere, in magazines. Fan communities pop up. There's speculation. There's rumors. There's even people who sell video games, and I don't literally just mean purchasing it, but selling it, marketing it. There's many arms to that. There's the advertising. There's how it was marketed to business, to retailers. There's PR, which is trying to get magazines to cover your game. So how do you capture all of this? This is a lot of stuff. And nowadays, especially with the conversations on Twitter and all of that, it's a really difficult thing to package this all nicely and put it somewhere. So I think our best bet is the video game media. The video game media is a time capsule. It shows you how a game was marketed and advertised. It'll tell you what industry news was being talked about, what rumors made the rounds. It'll, covers trade shows and events. Tons and tons of context. All of this stuff is really important for historians. So what I've got here, this is a page from GamePro, and you see a lot of context just in this one page of a magazine. You can see exactly what's going on in the industry in July of 1998. There's delayed games in Japan, Bandai's coming out with a new portable. It's all this news right here, and this will help you shape kind of what's going on, what else is going on in the world when you're talking about a video game. So knowing how the games are made and played is how we make an interesting story. And right now, people are really bad video game historians. Here's some examples. Jeopardy had this really excellent thing about a month ago. I don't know if you guys saw the meme that this is from, but there was just like a Photoshop of a Tetris manual that floated around, I think, a year and a half ago that was obviously Photoshop, where they called the Tetris pieces Orange Ricky and Smash Boy. Anyways, Jeopardy actually aired this. This is a real question. If you guys have seen Ready Player One or Reddit, they talked about how the very first video game Easter egg was Poor Robinette's Adventure. That wasn't even true at the time of writing it. You know, we're always discovering new first, right? Like, video game history is always changing. But that wasn't even true in 2011. It was super not true when the movie came out. There's at least 3 games that had earlier Easter eggs in it. But it's a movie. Everyone saw that. This is my personal least favorite right here. I'm a big Gunpei Koi fan. He was not a janitor. He's always been an engineer. I don't know where that one came from. And then you guys probably have heard somewhere that, you know, E.T. caused the game crash, and you've got people like NPR and stuff saying it's the worst game ever. Well, E.T. wasn't even the worst game to come out that month. This is from Electronic Fun with Computer and Games. And yeah, Gorf was worse that month. Just in that one issue, there was a worse Atari game. But you wouldn't, okay, this is clearly wrong. We've proved them wrong, right? All right, so let's go find a source. Let's go actually find this magazine. People are bad video game historians. It's not their fault. Here's a search I did from Seattle, Washington. This is a little bit, see, these are going to be closer to you guys now. This is Michigan and New York. But from Seattle, if I wanted any copy of Electronic Fun with Computers and Games, any copy, the closest library to me is 1,800 miles away, and they had 2 copies. They have 2 issues total. It's not that one. Even sites like RetroMags, which are doing a really great job scanning and preserving stuff, I mean, they're missing, Tips and Tricks was a pretty big magazine. This isn't like an obscure magazine. They're missing even the covers of some of these. Also, every single one of these is Mortal Kombat 2, which is very... So we want to make this easier. We have a library at the Video Game History Foundation that we're building right now, Video Game Media Library, and also Development Material Library. This is a place for this stuff to go so that historians can access it later, and so that, you know, we don't have NPR stories about how E.T. was the worst game ever. And I don't really excuse Jeopardy. I don't think that one would have been fixed by there being a library, but here are some of the things we've done. This is a photo from our, you know, very small office library right now. Up in the top, we were recently at Game Informer offices at Minneapolis, and we're digitizing all of their press material since 1991. They've been around since 1991. They've basically never moved offices, and they are hoarders, and it's awesome. So everyone thank Game Informer. They've saved a bunch of video game history by being hoarders. And when one of the IDOS offices closed down, we show up with, we literally will show up with a van. That's what we do. Anyways, so that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about, but this is, game preservation isn't always what it looks like or what you might think it is. There's other things you should consider, especially when you're making a game. Think about how people are going to talk about it in the future. Think about where your stuff can go. Save your stuff. Don't throw it in the trash. Don't overwrite your hard drives. And let's talk about this. I don't know.
Question!
Yeah, any questions?
Yeah, let's open the discussion.
I think this is like an ongoing discussion too. Like I don't feel like we've solved very much yet. So I'd love to just talk about this more. Honestly, it's a great spot for it.
Do you find like international gaming history at all? Because I always find it interesting that so much of gaming history is just focused upon sort of what happened in Japan and America.
Oh, sure.
But there's just storylines from everywhere else from around the world.
We've started collecting games media from English language magazines all over the world. So we have pretty extensive like Edge and Hyper and some of the other, you know, Australian, UK, all of that stuff. We've started collecting some Japanese magazines. Yes, I mean, I agree with you that a lot of the discourse is very, ethnocentric, very American. But that's another access thing, I think. I don't think that that's entirely because people aren't thinking about it. I think that it has a lot to do with just what we have access to here. And yeah, hopefully we can change that by making the other stuff more accessible.
I watched the GDC talk with the guy from EA. How widespread is that? Still like nascent? Where like is Activision doing that? Is Sony doing that? Like,
The only ones I know of are EA and Blizzard, and I have reason to believe that Nintendo has some sort of internal archive structure. They're obviously the most secretive of the secretive out there. That's pretty much it, and that's part of the reason that we're going to GDC every year and advocating for more people to have. I mean, it's tough. Hearing it from EA was really excellent because, you know, they're like, hey, look, we're a big studio like you guys are too, and we're doing it, so you can too. So for a lot of studios, it's just a budget thing. They're like, well, why would we need an archivist? Why would we need these things in place? And I think that showing them that there's commercial opportunities in this now is really helping drive the conversation. That's always what it was going to take, right? No one's going to just do anything out of the kindness of their heart, but but now that we have real paths for this, and I think the Aladdin Lion King one is a particularly strong example because that came from, you know, original source code rather than just you know, a lot of the HD things that come out these days are just kind of ports, and they're polished, and sometimes they kind of suck, and they don't get everything quite right. So seeing what can be done with the original source code and being able to get rid of the original bugs that were in the game and that sort of thing, I think is going to end up being a fairly powerful story that I hope convinces more companies that this is like a financially useful thing for them to do. Yeah.
So a place where a lot of people interact with history non-academically is museums, for example, and I know that a lot of museums are starting to move into like displaying video games like Indiecade, Ethno Pop.
Yeah, absolutely.
How would you integrate the work that you are doing into those exhibits?
That's a great question and something that we've sort of already done. We do a pop-up museum every year at the Portland Retro Gaming Expo, which is, you guys are pretty far from Portland, but it's like probably the biggest retro video game convention in the US. People fly from all over the place to do that. So for the last 3 years, we've put on a pop-up museum, and it's been the results of our research for the most part. I mean, there's the one we did last year, for instance, we had things from the collection of Howard Phillips from Nintendo. Are you guys familiar with Nintendo Power, the magazine?
Oh, yes.
Who's the guy with the bow tie? From Howard and Nestor Comics. But he was one of the first Nintendo employees, and so he had all kinds of things like the script that he had when he was showing off the Rob the Robot at malls and stuff, and it had, you know, it has his like comments on it that are like, lift Rob now. Show him, you know. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of a hard question to answer because I think sometimes there's actual artifacts in this, whether it's magazines that were covering something, like for instance, I'd consider that Time magazine with Pokemon on the cover to be an artifact that will be in a museum someday. Like, look how big Pokemania was, right? But also the results of researching that stuff can sometimes, you know, unearth things we didn't know, can lead us to find things that we didn't previously know about that could then become artifacts. So in terms of the materials themselves, I think sometimes they are the artifacts, and then sometimes I think that they lead us to the artifacts, if that makes sense.